Hey, are you watching this video without being subscribed? We recently looked over the channel analytics, and apparently a lot of people who watch the channel have not yet subscribed. So if you enjoy this channel, please subscribe. Not only will this ensure new episodes pop up in your feed, it also helps this content reach more people. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. So I recently saw the following post on Facebook.
Daddy, what if you are wrong about God and Jesus and the church? What if it's all for nothing? Sunday church meetings, Monday family home evenings, Thursday night activities, Saturday temple sessions, everyday scriptures, visiting the lonely, feeding the hungry, and blessing the sick. Well, if I am wrong, I wasted my life engaged in a joy that can only be found in service. If I am wrong, I needlessly kept the commandments that blessed me with health, safety, and happiness. If I am wrong, I blindly followed an imaginary Savior that made me more kind and more forgiving. If I am wrong, I have felt a fake comfort when loved ones passed away, provided by a false hope of eternity with them again. In other words, even if I am wrong, my error made me a better man, a better husband and father, a better brother and friend. I have lived a life of fulfillment. I have learned to respect and serve others, to be kind and generous, to donate if I have extra, to ask for help when I don't have enough. In short, if I am right, my eternity is beautiful. If I am wrong, my life is beautiful.
It's a beautiful sentiment. But is what this brother posted rational? Well, what he may not have realized when he made that post is that he's appealing to something called Pascalian logic. It's a method of reasoning put forth by the 17th century Catholic theologian and mathematician named Blaise Pascal. It should be noted that Pascal was not only a brilliant theologian and philosopher, he also was hugely influential in the development of probability theory, and he applied this theory to questions of belief in God. But I will let Susanna Reinard of Harvard explain more.
Hi, I'm Susanna Reinard, a philosophy professor at Harvard, and today I want to talk about Pascal's wager, an argument for belief in God. There have been many different arguments for theism throughout the history of philosophy, but Blaise Pascal, a 17th century French thinker, employed a particularly unusual strategy. He did not try to prove that God exists. He didn't even try to argue that God's existence is more likely than not. Instead, he lifted an approach from the gambling hall and argued that, given the odds and the potential payoffs, belief in God is a really good deal. Even if the chance that God actually exists is low, rationality, he claimed, compels us to wager for God. First, consider a different decision problem, whether or not to buy a lottery ticket. Holding fixed the price of the ticket, the sensible approach is to focus on two considerations. First, what are the chances of winning? And second, what is the size of the payoff? Holding fixed the payoff, the higher the chance of winning, the better the deal. But, equally, holding fixed the chance of winning, the larger the payoff, the better the deal. Most actual lottery tickets are not a good deal at all, but we can easily imagine a hypothetical lottery that's a really good deal, even if the chance of winning is still very low. For example, even if the chance of winning is only 1 out of 100, if the payoff is $1 billion, and the cost of the ticket is, say, only $1, it makes sense to buy a ticket. Pascal claims that belief in God is, by similar reasoning, an infinitely better deal than this. He reasons as follows. Either God exists, or God does not exist. If God exists, and you believe, the payoff is an eternity of happiness, an outcome of infinite value. If God exists and you don't believe, things will go much worse for you. So, if God exists, you're better off believing. Now, if God doesn't exist, then, regardless of what will happen to you if you believe, and what will happen to you if you don't believe, regardless of whether the value of each of those outcomes is positive or negative, And regardless of whether the first is larger than the second, or vice versa, this much seems clear. The value of each outcome will at least be finite.
Do you understand what she is saying here? The idea is that belief in God offers a potential infinite reward. So why would you ever sacrifice a potential infinite reward for a finite gain? However, she rightly points out the problem in this version of Pascal's wager.
Now, something about this reasoning might strike you as a little bit fishy. Indeed, philosophers have provided many objections to this version of Pascal's wager. One objection starts from the observation that the world contains many different religions, which postulate different gods, some of which would, if they exist, punish believers of other religions. Another objection claims that, even if Pascal's reasoning is good as far as it goes, it has no practical importance, since someone who doesn't already believe can't just decide to truly believe. A third objection holds that even if you could decide to believe, someone who believed in God because they thought it was a good gamble wouldn't be given the infinite reward.
To be honest, these are valid critiques, and every time you see a Pascal's wager debunked video on YouTube, you will see that they are debunking this weaker version of his argument. But as Dr. Reinhard points out, there is a stronger and I believe simpler version of Pascal's wager.
To conclude, I'll describe a different version of Pascal's wager, which may avoid some of the objections mentioned so far. There is some evidence that this version is closer to the argument as Pascal himself actually intended it. We start off with the same first premise. If God exists, you're better off as a believer than as a non-believer. But the second premise of this argument is different. It claims that even if God doesn't exist, you're still better off as a believer than as a non-believer. If so, then you're better off as a believer, whether or not God exists, and so you should believe in God. This argument relies on a very plausible general principle, which says that if, no matter what the world is like, the outcome of choosing option A will be better than the outcome of choosing option B, then you should choose option A. It's hard to argue with that. The crucial question for this version of Pascal's wager, though, is whether the second premise is right. Is it true that even if God doesn't exist, you're better off as a believer than as a non-believer?
Do you see what this does? It's remarkable. It shows that the rationality of placing your bet or faith in the existence of God is primarily a function of if it leaves you better off when compared with the alternatives. And that is a question that has a demonstrable answer. Just dig into the sociological literature. In just about every metric, from mental health to relationships, to crime, to wealth, to life satisfaction, to education and art, societies and individuals do better when they place their faith in God. This is the essence of the practical argument for faith in God. It's why even when faced with doubts, a person can still doubt those doubts and be perfectly rational in placing their bet on God and aligning their behavior with that belief. However, what if you simply don't believe?
Believing is not something you can decide to do as a matter of policy. I can decide to swear on a stack of Bibles that I believe every word inside them, but that can't make me actually believe it if I don't. Pascal's wager can only ever be an argument for feigning belief in God.
This is a genuine issue, but only if you are framing belief as binary. And I think that framing belief in God as a binary of I believe or I don't is an inaccurate way of framing the issue. Most self-proclaimed atheists are not even willing to say they are 100% rationally certain that there is no God. Everyone is more or less confident about it, but rarely can people honestly say they are certain. This is why when someone tells me they are agnostic, I can't help but chuckle a little bit and say, yeah, no duh, me too. You see, when it comes to belief in God, the question is not if you have perfect rational certainty on the matter. The question is, where have you placed your bet and why? Or, as a Christian would put it, have you placed your faith in God? You see, faith is where you place your bet when dealing in areas of uncertainty, and we all place it somewhere. Ultimately, this is manifest by our behavior. We all base our lives on something, whether we know it or not. And what we act out in the world is a manifestation of where we have placed our faith.
Religious is what you act out.
Anything you act out.
Everything you act out is predicated on your implicit axioms. And the system of implicit axioms that you hold as primary is your religious belief system.
Do you get what he's saying here? The implicit axioms from whence your behavior emerges manifests what you have placed your faith in.
It doesn't matter whether you're an atheist or not. That's just surface noise.
So it has nothing to do with divinity or
No, I didn't say
supernatural
that.
beings?
No.
Or it doesn't necessarily have to do with those?
No, it probably necessarily has to do with it too, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your voluntarily articulated statements about whether or not you believe in something like a transcendent deity. So, I mean, what you act out is much more what you are than what you say about yourself. And what the hell do you know about what you believe anyways? You're complicated, man.
It's a fair question.
Well, seriously, people are complicated. You know, like we're not transparent to ourselves at all.
Think about that. Have you ever considered what you really believe and what you say you believe might not be the same thing?
That's why we have to go to university and study psychology. It's like, you know, we're not exactly black boxes, but we are the most complicated things there are, right? And we can't even program our VCR clocks. So it's like, how the hell can we propose to understand ourselves? And, you know, I'm existentially oriented, which is to say that I think that what you hold to be true is best determined as a consequence of an analysis of your actions rather than as a consequence of an analysis of what you purport to believe. Now, in order to act, you can't act without a hierarchy of value, which I tortured the other poor questioner about. You can't act without a hierarchy of values because you can't act unless you think one thing is better than another. Because why would you act otherwise? So that means that you're embedded within a hierarchy of values, whether you know it or not, or maybe multiple fragmentary and competing hierarchies of value, which is all the worse for you, by the way, because it just makes you very confused.
This is actually a critical point. If you don't have a unified value system, then your value system will be like a pantheon of gods fighting with each other for dominance, and you will be disintegrated, and thus morally confused and conflicted psychologically.
That hierarchy of values has an axiomatic, it's based on axioms. And the probability that you understand them is very low because generally people don't understand their axioms. But that axiomatic system is essentially your religious system. And there's no way out of that as far as I can tell. And you can say, well, it isn't predicated on conscious belief in a transcendent deity. It's like, okay, have it your way. But, you know, most people in this room act out a Judeo-Christian ethic. And not only do they act it out, if they're treated in a manner that's not commensurate with that ethic, they get very, very, very annoyed. So, for example, if I fail to treat you as if you're an embodiment of a divine fragment, let's say, that's characterized by the ability to make free choice and to determine your own destiny in some sense, or if I fail to treat you as if you're a valued contributing member of the polity as a sovereign individual, then you'll find that very offensive and become angry. It's like, okay, then that's what you believe.
You see, regardless of what we say, if we have an integrated value hierarchy rather than a fragmented, disjointed, and confused one, we have something that we place at the top that unifies everything. I think a real life of seeking comes when a person begins asking themselves where their faith has been placed, and then more importantly, begin asking themselves, where should they place that faith? Because in asking that question, you realize that placing your faith in money or fame or power or sex or pleasure or people or anything temporal leaves you like a house built on sand, because any of those things can be taken from you at any time. So is it really irrational to place your faith in something transcendent? Pascal famously said,
"There are only two kinds of reasonable people in the world: those who serve God with all their heart because they know Him, and those who seek God with all their heart because they do not."
Now, maybe you are one of those rare people who is 100% certain that no higher power exists. If that's the case, then there's not much that I can do here. But what if you are not 100% sure? What if you were only 60% or 70% or 80% sure that there was no higher power? Would that 20 to 40% be enough? Well, I guess that would depend, right? What if placing your faith in that 20% or 30% or 40% chance made your life and the life of your community immensely better? And what if placing your faith in the alternative made your society completely fall apart? Would that have to be taken into consideration? For instance, let's say you were stuck in a burning building and doing nothing had a 99.9% chance that you would die a miserable, slow, agonizing death. But choosing to open the door and make a run down the hall had a 5% chance that you would make it out alive. Would you place your faith in that 5%? Obviously you would. You see, there are many instances where placing your faith in a small probability is immensely more rational because of the costs and benefits involved. So what are the costs and benefits of belief in God? What are the costs and benefits of belief in the restored gospel of Jesus Christ? Do you remember the post I shared at the beginning of this video? You see, this is why the pragmatic argument for faith is so powerful. While there are good evidences that provide a rational basis for belief in God, this argument shows you do not need demonstrable proof of God's existence in order to place faith in that proposition. It just needs to posit the following. First, that there is some real chance that God exists. And second, that faith in the proposition that God exists leads to better outcomes than the alternative. You see, most people can accept number one, and that's hugely important because this shifts the entire conversation to the second premise. And the rational pragmatist argues that faith in God is more beneficial than faith in some other proposition as a foundation for life. And thus, it is up to the skeptic to point out some other path that is better. And that's the brilliance of this argument. The pragmatic argument for belief turns the entire issue around and forces the skeptic to posit something better. Also, it should be noted, as mentioned in the burning building example, this Pascalian logic does not only apply to belief in God. It applies to any matter of uncertainty where the stakes of one's well-being are relevant. Here's the basic logic for a rational, pragmatic belief. Premise 1, X is unknown. Premise 2, if X is true, I am better off placing my faith in the proposition that X is true. Premise 3, if X is not true, I am still better off placing my faith in the proposition that X is true. Therefore, I should place my faith in the proposition that X is true. It's interesting to see how this sort of thinking relates to how Jordan Peterson describes his belief in God.
So people often ask me, do you believe in God? I act as if God exists. Now you can decide for yourself whether that means that I believe in him, so to speak. But I act as if he exists.
Some have said that Jordan Peterson is an atheist because he is only acting as if God exists. But do you see how that misses the point? Jordan is expressing that upon a self-analysis of his actions, he realizes that despite his uncertainties, he acts as if God exists. And furthermore, as he has reflected on this, he has realized that is exactly where he should be placing his faith. Jordan's core message is that our entire civilization and individual psychological stability in the Western world has emerged as a direct consequence of faith in and devotion to God.
The problem of deriving ethical direction from the collection of facts is an intractable problem. There's too many facts. There's an infinite number of facts. They do not provide an unerring guide for action. They can't. There's too many of them. They have to be prioritized. And as soon as they are prioritized, well, then you're in the ethical domain. And then that begs the question, what's the valid ethical domain? And the postmodern answer is, well, there isn't one. It's all the expression of domination and power. And I think that's nonsense. I don't think that's a tenable solution. I think that we stumbled onto the proper answer in some sense in our religious enterprise, which is that we aim at what's highest, or we don't. We aim at what's highest jointly, or we're divided. We aim at what's highest, and that gives meaning to all the things we do that are subordinate parts of that. We aim at what's highest, and that's what collects us and gives us structure, all of that, singly and jointly. And that's all what we've been trying to communicate all these centuries as we've been trying to communicate the whole religious corpus, generation after generation, and to sort this out and to straighten it out and to try to understand it.
I don't think many people realize the situation that we're in. On a purely rational basis, we essentially are all agnostic to some degree or another. But we all have a choice to make, and we can deliberately choose what we place at the top of our value hierarchy. Or we can just default to social acceptance as the highest value and absorb whatever is popular among our friends. In the end, we all have to ask ourselves, where should I place my faith? And that leads us to looking at the alternative places where we can place that faith. So if you have somewhere better for me to place my faith, I genuinely would love to hear about it. But in the meantime, I can't help but find this resonating with me.
Well, if I am wrong, I wasted my life engaged in a joy that can only be found in service. If I am wrong, I needlessly kept the commandments that blessed me with health, safety, and happiness. If I am wrong, I blindly followed an imaginary Savior that made me more kind and more forgiving. If I am wrong, I have felt a fake comfort when loved ones passed away, provided by a false hope of eternity with them again. In other words, even if I am wrong, my error made me a better man, a better husband and father, a better brother and friend. I have lived a life of fulfillment. I have learned to respect and serve others, to be kind and generous, to donate if I have extra, to ask for help when I don't have enough. In short, if I am right, my eternity is beautiful. If I am wrong, my life is beautiful.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button so my future videos show up on your feed. Also, if you or someone that you know has benefited from the content here on Thoughtful Faith, please consider becoming a channel donor or volunteer by visiting my new website, thoughtfulfaith.org, and clicking on the Get Involved page.